In this episode, we are joined by my longtime friend, mentor, colleague, and teammate. From the green side, of course, go Navy, beat Army. His name is Matt Bigge, partner at Crosslink Capital. With decades of unique experience acting as a founder, CEO, operator, and VC, Matt has found himself repeatedly at the edge of cybersecurity, enterprise infrastructure, digital transformation, and what he calls plausible science fiction. His investment portfolio includes breakouts such as Veridon, CloudShield, Naris, which was acquired by Boeing, and ArcSight. But beyond his success at investing and returning capital, Matt is a mentor to many and brings his military precision to the art of teams, leadership, and culture, always emphasizing the forced multiplying effect of these driving forces. Join us as we explore Matt's journey, his insights on leadership, and the importance of mentorship and the core values that drive his focus. If you're inspired by these conversations and want to stay connected with more deep discussions, please make sure to subscribe and follow us. Welcome to TLC Equation, where we uncover the universal truths behind the greatest teams, leaders, and cultures on Earth.
Like magic.
Throughout history, TLC Equation has brought to life the most extraordinary teams, leaders, and cultures the world has ever seen.
Words and ideas can change the world.
From Aurelius to Roosevelt, Ford to Musk, Marriott to Airbnb, Olympians, Navy SEALs, and professional athletes.
Limits, like fears, are often just an illusion.
TLC Equation is timeless, industry agnostic, and a proven blueprint used throughout history by ordinary people who went on to architect extraordinary visions, impacting billions of lives.
That goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
I am your host, Joe Musselman. Welcome to TLC Equation, the show that explores certain universal truths behind the greatest teams, leaders, and cultures on Earth. Powered by Caspian Studios, subscribe now to TLC Equation, everywhere podcasts can be found.
BBVC is an inception seed stage venture capital fund dedicated to accelerating frontier technologies while allowing first look access to special operations and the commercial markets that matter most to national security. They are headquartered in Chicago with critical operations in several cities across the United States. Our companies have enormous commercial applications and the potential to provide U.S. special operations with cutting-edge, real-time prototypes to leverage for the broader defense of the United States and our allies globally. In a world where innovation must collide with duty, there stand pioneers who imagine a world where our way of life feels safe. While we know in reality the statement is unreasonable and our world will never be safe, this is exactly why our founders must thrive and win. American ingenuity and risk-taking have inspired the world for nearly 2.5 centuries. Unreasonable people, willing to break the status quo, have created the greatest innovations in human history. This must be us. To know more about our commitment to reshaping the future now, please visit bv.vc and let's build together. Schoolhouse was incepted in 2019 and finally founded in 2023 by U.S. Special Operations, Venture Capital, and Intelligence community members alongside several civilian patriots. Schoolhouse is backed by top-tier funds, firms, foundations, and founders. Their platform offers 7 unique experiences conducted annually in person and remote, tailored to the unique needs of early seed venture-backed technology startups in the national security sector. Designed entirely to equip and accelerate mission-first founders with capital, customers, and community so the United States and our allies win. Schoolhouse, where capital, customers, and community collide. If you'd like to join us, please visit school.house. What's up, man?
Well, it's great to see you. Always fun to hang out. We've had a big month in the Bigge family. Our son made his Major League Baseball debut with the Cubs, which was exciting. And
what was that like? Like you were in the stands watching your boy. I mean, I have a 2-year-old, for people's perspective, who I just watched, T-ball, and now you're watching your son. I sent you pictures, and then you sent me one back. And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. So tell me, what was that like, man? That's got to be crazy.
I mean, it's just surreal. It's very, very difficult to describe the blend of excitement, pride, humility at just the sheer volume of time and effort that he put into it. And, as parents, you always want your kids to achieve their dreams. And when you show up to this event with 45,000 other people and you watch your son jog out onto the field and realize something he's been working for, since he was probably 4 years old, I think was the first time he played on an organized baseball team. But then it got even crazier because he had a, really fun first week in the big leagues. Then last Sunday, we're sitting on the couch waiting for his game to start. And we get a text message from him saying he was traded to Tampa. So we got home, I don't know, 12 or so hours ago or 15 hours ago from a week of running around the country with the Tampa Rays. And so, he made his first appearance with them on I think it was Monday night, and then he pitched again in Houston. He pitched twice in Houston. So anyway, we got to see him pitch three times in the last week, and it's just been electric.
So you were there with Heidi for the Cubs game?
Yeah.
And tell me, like, what was the conversation like between you two during the game? Like, what were some of the things you two were talking about?
No, there's focus.
There's no talking.
No, it's all right. Keeping an eye on the bullpen to see if he's warming up. And, we had some relatives and family friends who were with us. Just several people were taking turns checking the bullpen. And, finally, Hunter's father-in-law sent us a picture of Hunter warming up in the bullpen. And so we're like, all right, it's go time.
Wow. And so you did get to see him pitch that game too, right?
Yeah. A really nice outing. It was 1-2-3 innings, struck a guy out. Nice. I think he struck out their 4 or 5 slot hitter, 100-mile-an-hour curveball, outside corner. Sat him down looking. So that was just a ton of fun.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Are there mutual feelings that you had from when you see anything in your professional life from a company making it to a certain milestone that could compare to that?
The board meeting where you approve either an S1, an IPO registration, or you approve the sale of the business, when it's a good one. Those are pretty special moments as well. And, as somebody who tends to invest really, really early stage, I always try to be the person who motions to approve that type of thing. Doesn't always work out that way logistically, but it is kind of fun to know that, all right, in the minutes, it will say, Matt Bigge motion to approve XYZ. But that's probably the closest. I say closing a new fund, doing a first close on a new fund, that's a pretty big deal as well. But, here's the crazy math. I mean, there's thousands of venture funds. There have been about 21,000 Major League Baseball players in the 150 years that they've been keeping track. So it's making a big league debut is a pretty rare thing. So it's, we have the Olympics on. It's statistically in that category.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, that's amazing. I'm trying to think. So the first, just for everybody that's listening, I've known, this is a special conversation for me. I've known Matt for nearly a decade, and we were introduced by someone who's very special to both of us. His name is Kevin Compton, and Kevin introduced us initially for the work that I was, focused on at the time was with the Honor Foundation, honor.org, and it's the country's first career transition institute for the special operations community. And that's been a crazy journey. But when I was first introduced to Matt, it was actually a dual call with our other friend, Ross Hangebrock. And we took that whole call together and like flash forward a decade. Ross is one of my closest friends and allies and confidants and an early mentor. And you're I would definitely call a close confidant, early mentor, and inspiration to come into venture. There's only a handful of people that I talk about often that inspired me to consider venture as a possibility. And Matt was one of those people. And the reason why Matt's a great leader, and this is one of my qualifiers when I look back and retroactively look at, okay, who were the real leaders in my life? Matt was one of those because he believed in me before I believed in myself. And I think that is a big quality of a leader, and the give back where there is nothing there in expectation in return, another big quality of leadership. So, Matt, I literally would not be sitting here having this conversation with you alongside you if you didn't come into my life. So I owe you a debt of gratitude for the rest of my life and my family as well. So I'm very grateful to have the dialogue with you today.
Well, you're going to make me cry like I did on national TV when the kid was playing ball. But no, I appreciate it and thank you. And you're an easy guy to believe in. I've said it a number of times that, at the end of the day, you embody something my son once said to me. He said, if it's worth doing, it's worth dominating. And, one of the things that you're really, really good at is doing, when you say you're going to do it, you get after it and do it and you do it right. And that makes it real easy to believe in people when they come at the world with that type of an approach. And, it's one of the things that I've always found compelling about military veterans is, people often ask me, what did you take away from your time in uniform? Mm-hmm. And there are a ton of takeaways, many of which are not appropriate. But, the thing
translatable, but just not appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing I'd say is most important, and it doesn't get enough play in terms of the way we think about veterans in this country, is as a veteran, you must become, or as a military member, you must become elite at setting and achieving goals in a team-based setting. If you cannot do that, you will not succeed. I think you get that in sports as well. Certainly you're not going to be a very good high-end athlete if you can't do that. But that is a critical business skill. When you ask founders, I think about the tour that you did interviewing founders to understand from the successful ones what was the distinction between winners and not winners. And it's the ability to set and achieve goals in a team-based setting at an elite level. And turns out military, sports, great places to develop that skill set.
Yeah. And also followership, right? I don't know if enough people break down the actual attributes. And this was something I just had an LP conversation today that inspired me in this direction that said, he made a comment about kind of the concreteness that I took from an instinct and then put to paper. And we know this, that like thinking formalized is writing. And so to take the instinct that Matt Bigge has in his gut on what he has done, and then to apply that fund over fund over fund over fund, and try to pull out the instinct, put it in writing, and then apply it through action, that consistency over a career is something LPs look for, is something I look for in founders. What have you been doing for a really long period of time? Best predictor of future behavior, past behavior. So trying to get to those past circumstances of followership where how did you convince someone or maybe not convince someone? This is what TLC Equation is all about, teams, leadership, culture. There's a certain followership that goes along with this equation where you can't explain it, but when you hear a founder articulate a vision with crystal clarity, and then you see them start to execute that vision into a mission, and then execute according to a certain value set. That's the VMV, the vision, mission, values that we talk about on this show all the time. And you just kind of outlined it. And so I'm always wondering this, going back to the teams, the leaders, and the cultures that mattered most to you. There's a question I love to ask. And, who was the, who would you attribute your leadership directly to? Who is one of those people?
There's so many. I always joke about my professional life that I haven't had a career. I've just had a series of things that I've done, and some have worked out. And I feel like there's so much to learn from so many people, whether, an easy one is Paul Meggers, who was my last boss in the Army, very, very close friend. You've met him a couple of times, I believe, back when you lived in San Diego. Paul taught me a ton when he was company commander and I was his executive officer. Just about the right way to do things, the right way to, be, dogmatically pragmatic. And what I mean by that is to have rigorous standards and really hold people to those standards, but also to apply common sense as appropriate. Living by the letter of the law is not always where you want to be. And there are times when as a leader, you have to make judgment calls, but there are unassailable things that you must uphold in terms of standards. And that was something that, Paul and I, we had to do some cleanup, at one point, in terms of getting the right people into the right jobs. And his relentless approach to making sure we had the right people in the right roles made our unit better, made our jobs a lot easier. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, made our nation better, because strong army equals strong nation.
That's right. Rigorous standards. Absolutely. Have you ever taken time to framework out your standards, even in fun, just scribbling in a notebook or journal? Like, how do you framework your standards?
The framework I tend to go with more is it's a deviation. I know where you're going, but I'm going to tack a little. The framework I tend to apply to things, I call it FIRE, so FIRE, and is what I'm considering fun. Do I really enjoy doing it, and do I really enjoy the people that I'm doing it with? And that people part does get to, are these people of high integrity, of character? Are these people, that are good humans? And that's the F. The I is interesting. Do I find it interesting enough that it keeps me up at night and I'm psyched about it? Like, it's kind of, your first night before a new job, you're so excited you can't sleep. Is it rewarding both extrinsically and intrinsically? Extrinsically, you got to pay the bills. And, particularly when you leave the military, learning how to make the world pay you to do, pay you a market rate for what you're doing is a difficult thing to learn, because all of a sudden you have to negotiate compensation as opposed to just look on a chart. But the other is intrinsically rewarding. And, when you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, do you know for a fact that you left the world better than you found it yesterday? Are you doing that one thing a day just one, no matter how small, that is absolutely selfless. And if you're not, you probably need to rethink yourself, because you don't have much time on this earth. And for any of us to go a full day without doing something completely selfless, well, that's just obnoxious. And it's just not being a good human. And then the E is entrepreneurial. And it's not as in starting companies. It's more about, are you an organically entrepreneurial person that you're learning and growing and developing every day, every week? And so if you think about, fun, interesting, rewarding, and entrepreneurial, and you apply it to the things you're doing and who you're doing it with, it's always felt like a pretty good checklist, decisioning framework for me.
Yeah. I didn't mean to lead the witness towards that question, but this is a framework that I really like, because it applies to, the last decade of my experience of working with people who truly are elite. And I've had a privilege to work with the 0.001% warfighters in the world, from special operations community, from the SEAL community to the Army community, and so on. And they all they never discuss retiring, ever. They never talk about retiring. They always talk about, in a sense, refiring. And so, they don't want to retire, they want to refire. They're just refiring from one career to another career. And when I first met you in person, I believe the first time we actually met in person was it wasn't at what's that place called? The Duck, not the Duck. What's it called?
The Dutch Goose?
Yeah, that was not the first time we met.
I think the first time was at UCSD. Yep.
That's right. And you had mentioned something like this, and it's so funny to me that even when we talk about TLC Equation, the origin story of TLC comes from the community, comes from the teams. Because I heard the exact same thing over and over again when I went on that listening tour that you described, that when I stayed in the Frog in Palo Alto that Kevin Compton allowed me to stay in. I didn't even know what a Frog was. And for the folks listening, he's like, "Oh, I have a Frog. It's right off Main Street by Stanford, and it's a finished room over garage." And I did not know that was a thing. And he's like, "Stay there when you do your listening tour." And when I was interviewing founders, and he, of course, wanted me to report back and tell him what I learned. But one thing I did learn in the early listening tours of the foundation was, and so many people listening to this, from our current teammates to you at home, we've all asked ourselves the exact same question. The folks transitioning from one elite community and hoping to find the next great adventure, they all ask themselves the exact same question. I just want to be part of an extraordinary team. I want to follow an extraordinary leader. And I want to be part of something. I want to be part of a culture that's much bigger than myself. TLC. I heard the same thing over and over again. And it's so applicable to what you talked about for FIRE. It's like, how do I framework fun, interesting, rewarding entrepreneurship, intrinsically, extrinsically motivating, and then you live and die by one of the things that I grew up hearing all the time from my father, which was leave it better than when you found it. But it would be about everything. Right, like clean the bathroom, the kitchen, didn't matter. So I love that part as well. I don't want that to be overlooked. Leaving it better than when you found it.
Yeah, that to me, that's if you do nothing else in this world, you leave it better than you found it. And it's, and hopefully we do that when we meet with companies. I mean, obviously we can't invest in every company. And there are great companies out there that just aren't a fit for, Crosslink or your firm. And that's okay. But hopefully over the course of the conversation where you're learning it's not a fit, you can help with something, even if it's a tiny little thing. And sometimes that's all you got time to do. But leaving the world better than you found it is probably one of the more important things we all really ought to be focused on. And that's something that, I've found transcends culture. And there's a lot of differences when you run around this big world. But one of the things that's very, very consistent is parents just want their kids to grow up in a better world than they did. And the only way that ever happens is if all of us take the time to leave it better than we found it.
Yeah, that's right. You made an interesting transition from operator to operator entrepreneur to operator entrepreneur founder CEO. And in those early years, you had to do a whole lot of everything. and you experienced a really successful outcome. And I want to talk about the transition from finding your way to that first outcome and then that in-between moment. I love dissecting those in-between moments.
Well, it's funny. When I first got into the startup world, it was shortly after I got out of the military, and it was the late '90s. I mean, if you screwed up then, you weren't awake. I mean, it was just too easy. Money was, looking back on it, it's not, obviously nothing's easy, but it was interesting how going public was the easiest thing in the world back then. You'd have companies go from zero to IPO in 12, 15 months, which is insane. But, so we had some early wins back then, but the degree of difficulty in business building honestly didn't truly settle in on me until probably a few years later, when I was, learning, doing more empiric learning, which empiric learning is painful. Vicarious learning is less painful. Always learn vicariously when you have the option. It's much better to watch somebody else burn their hand on the stove and realize you don't need to touch it. But I feel like I spent much of the 2000s touching stoves. So those were difficult years, both economically and just professionally. But.
Yeah, absolutely. There's struggle in everyone's story. And when we think back to the struggles, they always seem to be the best professors. And so what is the struggle that you think of often, like the one that was emotionally shaping for you, that you think of every day and you hope to never relive again? What struggle and what kind of failure struggle lives in a professorial mindset that you think of often in your mind?
Yeah, there was about a year in my last company where we had won a big contract, and I probably did not put sufficient weight on the value of collecting receivables in a timely manner. And so that means even though we're going to have a record-setting year for revenue, and from an accounting standpoint, we were very profitable, that doesn't track payables and receivables. And so there were a few times where, the Bigge family had to make some donations to the company to cover payroll and things like that. And you start realizing just the enormity of what it takes, or the enormity of the responsibility for payroll. When you've got, hundreds of employees, it's, you have to make sure they get paid, because if they don't get paid, their families don't eat. And, it's not quite that simple, but the pressure cooker of that was really dramatic for me. And then, all right, we're going to get really, really good at collections. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that meant flying somewhere and sitting outside an office for, say, a week and just harassing people until they get so sick of you, they give you money. Yeah. And I remember we had to do that once with a customer in Iraq, where I just literally went and sat outside his door and sat there with my laptop and did work and pretty much blocked this guy's ability to come and go.
Yeah.
And we got paid.
Now that's a lesson. That's a professorial lesson.
Well, and that's a CEO's job.
Right.
You know, one of my guys was always like, "You're the CEO. You shouldn't have to do this." And I'm like, "You're right. I'd love not to do it."
Right.
but I'm also the one who has to write a check for payroll if I don't get this money.
So that story, I'm going to refer to that story often now because, you know, we live in this time where, you know, look, one of my first founding journeys was, you know, building, you know, a national not-for-profit organization. And I would argue that early founding journey in my life, now having gone through many others, is 3 times harder for many different reasons. Truly, it is. Because you're not just going out and finding investors. You have to find a filter, someone who has a filter where first they have the means to contribute, then they have a lens of the world in which they see the world the same way that your vision and mission of the charity sees the world. And then they have to also have a giving spirit. They want to give more than they receive, and they're at a point in their life where they're at a give back phase, or they care enough to give. Give me $1 million, and I'll show you how in 3 to 5 years I'll give you 3 to 5 back on the for-profit side, versus give me $1 million and I'll show you how much good this does in the world. Those are 2 very different pitches. So what you just outlined is this is why I have such a rigorous standard for when people call themselves entrepreneurs. And I think there's a lot of wantrepreneurs and, you know, part-timers and consultants are not, they might be entrepreneurial, but they're not entrepreneurs until people's livelihoods rely on you coming through. I don't believe that you're an entrepreneur. And I'm sorry that it's a little rigorous, but that story just outlined that. And when people rely on you it doesn't matter whether it's a for-profit, nonprofit, if people rely on you to make payroll, you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think that's right. And every now and then people do tell me that I might be a little, might have expectations of effort levels that may be a little different than what is considered the norm in polite society.
You know, dude,
but you're not here to find average people.
That's right. And so to put a perfect, you know, period on that point, Matt, you have always had this really unique ability, which is why I've kind of clung to you from a mentorship perspective. And for folks listening who might be early in your journey, and you know, I've had a few younger founders on some recent calls. Once they felt that they could ask me these types of questions, which was, you know, after a 30-minute call, I try to get to real as quickly as I can, but they finally felt comfortable. Well, how do I go about finding a mentor, right? And I was like, oh, they're already in your life. They're already there. You just haven't formally labeled them that. And then you have to make sure that they know that they are your mentor, and then you have to give them a job to do. Meaning, I need help with this. And you were so helpful to me because you have this is a truly unique leadership quality. Compton has it, you have it, different tones and styles, but it's the same thing from a genre, which is you can give me feedback, or what I call a critique, because nobody likes feedback. I don't care who you are. If you look up the audio visual definition of feedback, it means a loud, irritating noise. All right? So I don't think anybody likes feedback. But a critique, that's iron sharpens iron. That's a whetstone process. It's sharp. It's pointed. And you have an ability to give critiques where I don't feel anything. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. You give it in such a way where I can tell that you've listened and you have my best interests in mind when you're giving it back, when you're critiquing me in that way. You don't call it a critique, but I can tell that it is one. I don't feel angry, upset, and I don't feel like happy or sad. I feel that this is knowledge and I have to pay attention. But you never command attention when you're doing it. You do it flawlessly. I can count on my one hand how many people in my life can do that. And I go to you for more direct, right? It's truthfully, I do. right? If I want like the narrative, the anecdote, and like the perfect positioning of a one line, you know, I mean, Compton is like, he's like biblical.
Well, he's Yoda.
He's Yoda. One line. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know why I just overthought that. Like that's exactly right, Kevin. Like I try to be so prepared to go into those calls with him because I want to get as many questions in because I know he will take 4 seconds to answer each one. And but you have that ability and I've always been very grateful for that. I hope I'm that way for others. But I needed to let you know that is a very unique quality that you have.
Well, thank you. To me, it's, the feedback or critique process is one of the more important things that we do as investors, particularly if you're sitting on a board or, you're day one investing. And one of the things I've always been really, really impressed with are people, and you do this, people who solicit, input, and they don't just blindly implement the input. They take the input, they contextualize it to their particular situation, and then arrive at a decision and a course of action that they own because it's theirs. Because I feel like when people just take guidance and advice from third parties and implement it without making it their own, it seldom goes well.
Yes.
And the ability to contextualize input from multiple sources, ideally, typically results in a far better outcome.
Yes. I've been gathering this list of questions since 2014. Since the first listening tour I went on in 2013, I started to keep this running list of questions that are so simple, but they give you great pause. So like, what are those simple questions? And little did I know back in 2013 and 2014 that if I just waited 10 more years, my 4-year-old would give me all those questions that I needed, truly. But I didn't have a 4-year-old then, but I did have a newborn, and it was a company. And so I was trying to translate certain things. And, there was this question that my father used to ask me as a child to prove a point. And you usually get asked this question. I don't know, it's not condescending, but if I were to see you in a social setting and I didn't know you and I asked you this question, you would think I was ready to go like fisticuffs, right? But it's such a simple question, 5 or 6 words, and it's, who do you think you are? But when you really think about that question, and I usually put this at the end of a conversation with a founder that I'm pretty far along with, and I'm trying to really understand a core value set or a set of principles, right? Because that's the 5th category demand signal that I look for at the fund is this must be an absolute alignment with our fund's core values. And, we have 6 core values at the fund. But when I ask someone, it's always about asking questions, then working backwards from their answers. And so when I say, at the end, hey, look, I just have a couple simple questions for you, but, who do you think you are? And then I will ask, who do you know you are? And then you just kind of wait to see where they go. And it's always a great pause, like always, because they're trying to, I don't want them to be strategic. I want them just to answer instinctively. So at this stage in your career, like, who do you think you are? And then who do you know you are?
I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a coach. And it's, I'd love to say that I'm a brilliant strategist or technology evaluator or any of that other stuff, but the fact is I'm not. If I was really, really great at that, I'd still be running companies, not investing in them. And I think, I think I was better than average, but, results may vary. I think you ask me who do I think I am? I think I am pretty good at coaching folks, and I enjoy doing it because seeing the fruits of your work is phenomenal. And, it even gets back to one of the things we talk a lot about at Crosslink, humility, integrity, transparency, and success. But we start with humility because we're the investors. We're the money behind the people who actually do amazing, heroic things. We're not amazing or heroic. And we should not be treated as if we are. The goal is, I always say, I've never made a nickel being in the press as an investor. I've made plenty of nickels when the people who do the real work are in the press. And so for me, just seeing a portfolio company be successful, that's the test of whether or not, we're doing our jobs the right way. But to me, it starts with humility, integrity, transparency, and success. And by transparency, I'm not talking about, all this. What I mean by transparency in that context is you have to be transparent with one another about difficult things. You have to be able to ask hard questions. You have to be able to have hard conversations, because otherwise you're never going to keep learning and growing. And as a leader, the second you stop learning and growing, the end is nigh.
So that was one of the first Kevinisms that stuck with me, that made me think. And I have been truly blessed to have some gold standards in my life early. And I didn't, and I think it's one thing to know someone as a gold standard, and then you work into that person being a part of your life, versus the other way, which is you don't know they're the gold standard and you're ignorant to what that is, and they form you and shape you in that direction. So, like, for instance, you know Hal Kirkendall, right? Hal was iron sharpens iron. He was a true Texan. He was direct. He was straightforward. He was a banker, but he was also wrapped in emotion for the cause. We bumped heads all the time. I look back at myself like a stranger in those years of my life thinking, how did he stick with me? Right? And there's a broader story that I'll eventually tell that's one of the more emotional stories where that man always did the right thing for me, for the organization, for the institution, all personal feelings aside. He always did the right thing. And that principle that I took away, and I read him a set of principles before I left San Diego and moved back to Chicago, that he didn't, when I read him do the right thing and then the principle around it, he was crying, and he's like, I just didn't think that you were paying that close attention to these types of things, because I read him all 10 of the things that I will take away from him for the rest of my life. And so anyways, that one thing that you just read, though, that you mentioned about Kevin, is a Kevinism that I took away, which was none of the success belongs to investors. It's not our returns, right? It's the founders who have done extraordinary jobs, and we happen to benefit from those returns, which I think funnels into one of the reasons why I feel that you ended up at Crosslink as a culture, because you were drawn to that humility part of it. And look, we're showing up wearing matching gear. I understand people watching are like, oh, they're so cute, they're wearing matching gear. But that's right. And look, I'm wearing, I'm not even wearing, BV gear. I'm wearing your gear, because I believe so deeply in what the alpha community stands for. And you walk through these events, and that's what you feel. You feel humility, you feel transparency, you feel the values of Crosslink come to life. And that to me is the course that I teach at Schoolhouse is called Absolute Alignment. And you all are so aligned with that vision, mission, and value set into Alpha, which is why I've been such a strong supporter in any way that I possibly can to the institutions that you represent. But you ended up at Crosslink after your building journeys and your founding journeys, and then you ended up at Crosslink. So I would love for you to talk about that, like coming into that institution.
Well, it was one of the easier decisions I've made professionally. I first met Eric Chin in August of 1997. It was during orientation, my first year in business school. We immediately hit it off, and we ended up staying up very, very late that night talking about and he had been at a venture-backed startup and then had worked at a venture capital firm. I was at a company that had raised some capital, and we were kind of incubating other businesses. So we were also, we kind of both lived in that world. And a lot of the conversation was around someday we're going to grow up and be general partners at venture firms. And what are we going to do different when it's our turn? And one of the biggest things was venture should be played as a team sport. And I think too many firms out there, this is less true than it used to be, but back then in particular, and it's still true in many pockets, venture firms are really collections of individuals who share a back office in a pool of capital. And that's why you don't see a whole lot of firms that get to Fund 10, Fund 11, et cetera. And so Eric and I, that was the day we met. We were having that conversation. Then there's David Silverman, who I first met, I think it was either 99 or 2000, and then came very, very close to going to work with him at his prior firm in 2008. The global financial crisis intervened, and instead of joining a venture firm, I started a company. So we had to delay working together. So after I finished my earnout period or whatever, after selling Strategic Social, I knew I wanted to go back into full-time investing. And so I went to my two best friends in the venture business that, at that point I'd known for, almost 20 years each. And I said, all right, Eric, David. And at this point, they had joined Crosslink in 2010 and 11 and were kind of running the venture business at Crosslink. And so I said, I need y'all to be a good reference, and I need y'all to introduce me to some LPs because I'm going to go raise a little fund. And Eric said, no problem, we got your back. I'll start putting it together. And David said, no.
Yeah.
I have a different idea here.
Right.
And so we began informally working together to see if it would be a fit. It's great to have two people that you've known for decades that can be your partners. And, and I spent about 9 months getting to know the rest of the firm to make sure, because it's not just them. But I think it's really a critical thing in the venture business, because when you make an investment, you're not just investing LP money, you're investing each other's money.
Yeah, that's right.
A meaningful percentage of every one of our funds is our own money.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you have a confederacy that shares a back office and you have a company that doesn't work out, that's not always going to play out real well. But if you have people that go back decades with one another, I mean, heck, Eric and I go back 28 years. And that's over half of our lives at this point. And so when you have people that you've known that long, you have this trust. You know how they behave in thick and thin. And then when I look at our two other partners, Gabby and Phil, I mean, they've both been with the firm over 10 years.
Yeah.
And so
extraordinary people, by the way, for folks listening, Phil and Gabby are just extraordinary people.
And they're wonderful investors.
Yeah.
But when you have a team that's very purpose built, it's a really different look and feel versus a firm that maybe was built with headhunters.
Tell me the difference. This is something that, again, I'm sure I'm overthinking the talent strategy for my fund. Like, I'm almost positive I'm overthinking it. But constructing team and fabric of team is so important to me. And I've learned, and I've taken the time to learn and then architect a set of principles that go specifically into forming a first-time team, and some things that need to go into that, and how long the on-road needs to be, and where are my individual blind spots that I'm looking out for, that I know I have to, truly bring in people that I trust to give me good critiques on where my blind spots may be with these people. And when I come to you for these types of things, I come to a lot of folks for these types of things. But when you're constructing this, when you're thinking about going to this team, you're talking about a 9-month period, right? What is the difference between being in a competitive team versus, or competing against people in your team versus competing with people in your team, meaning you are going out into this competition together? And folks, somebody the other day, asked me, venture, it's kind of like a wrestling team, hence the Olympics. And we were talking about some stuff where it's an individual sport, but you're still kind of competing together, and the team score is aggregated. I'm like, yeah, kind of. But how would you describe the competition and the competitive nature internal to the firm at Crosslink, and why that was attractive to you?
Well, so I think traditional venture firms do resemble a wrestling team. I think we do not. I think we more closely represent or resemble a team sport, basketball, football, whatever.
Football, yes. Yep.
And the reason why I say that is, if we have a portfolio, if David has a portfolio company that needs help with something where Gabby is an expert, Gabby is all over that. And we do that sort of thing all the time. And it is very common for us to help each other out in portfolio companies. And certainly the associates get thrown all over everything, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, that's right.
But, so to me, that's...
Well, by the way, that's the best way for them to learn. Right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
The best way for them to learn. It's the only way for them to learn is to be thrown into it.
Yeah. You get thrown in the water, you're going to swim or...
You're going to swim. That's right. Or you're not.
Swim. Yeah.
That's right.
And we need to know how that's going to play out either way.
That's right.
So to me, I don't view it as competing against my colleagues at Crosslink at all. We compete against other firms to win deals.
Sure.
But, we also kind of view it as we want to work with people who want to work with us. Yeah. And if we demonstrate our value and we demonstrate who we are, and there's a good, there's not inappropriate dissonance, those are the folks we really want to work with. And I think it's something you talk a lot about in terms of just getting inside the person to understand like what makes them tick. Is so much of that matters more than people realize. At the end of the day, a success, a good venture return on a seed or Series A takes 7 to 8 years. And that means you're going to spend a lot of time together. And, one of my other things is you can run 100 meters with a pebble in your shoe, maybe get a blister. You run a marathon with a pebble in your shoe, they're going to cut your foot off. So this is a marathon. Make sure there are no pebbles in the shoe. Because even if they are, then you need to move on.
Yeah. There's, being at many alpha events and Crosslink events, why Why is alpha intrinsically linked to the success at Crosslink and vice versa?
Well, so Eric created Alpha along with Mike Chung from Circle Capital. And this was back in 2004. Yeah, they would go to networking events that usually there's a stage, there's a panel, there's all this hoopla. 1,000 people at the event. There's like 4 that you actually are really wanting to meet, and maybe you see them, maybe you don't, and that's just tough. And so one day they were having a conversation with a very successful entrepreneur. It was now a very successful entrepreneur. He was a little bit less well known back then. And, you know, they started kicking around ideas, and they came up with the concept of alpha. And, you know, really the heart of alpha are these, you know, 15 to 18 person dinners that are off the record conversations amongst founders, sharing hacks on how to build their companies, run their companies, and, you know, just be better at life. Mm-hmm. And taking that, you know, leaving it better than you found it type of an approach is really invaluable. And that's why it's set up as a 501c3. It's set up as not-for-profit. And it's because the mission of Alpha is not to advance Crosslink.
Yeah.
You know, the founders, one's a partner at Crosslink, one's a partner at Founder Circle. But the purpose here is to advance entrepreneurship. And when those 15 to 18 people are coming to dinner, yeah, a few of them might be from our portfolio, but they're just the best founders we could find around a given topic. Mm-hmm. And that's where if you get the best, you put the elite in the room together and let them share best practices on how to continue to be elite and become more elite.
That's right.
Well, that's just got good
right.
ecosystem benefit.
That's right.
I attended one of the first dinners as a CEO, and
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
Did you attended an alpha dinner as a CEO
in 2004 or 5? It was.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and it was, you know, very very early stage. Zappos, Cafe Press, Zynga, like.com. I was acting CEO of a company called People Media. We had this much less well-known Reid Hoffman guy who was moderator, and and he was magical. Shocker. It was an amazing dinner, and the caliber of attendees has continued to grow and be amazing. And, you know, the things that I learned there directly led to, you know, getting connected with the right people in Interactive Corp, who ultimately acquired People Media.
One thing I can't ignore is that I am addicted to meaningful spaces and places where people are arriving with a certain mental framework, prepared to be a certain way around a certain group of people. And what you just described is, you know, you can imagine that what I did at honor.org was I put 40 fellows in a room who were all in the exact same place in life to go through a meaningful experience together. And so when I think of me leaving the schoolhouse of the Honor Foundation and then trying to seek out where are other meaningful conversations happening, because that's actually what I'm addicted to. I'm addicted to being in rooms where people are actually being themselves and trying to get to the bottom of something difficult. And so when I went to, you were kind enough to invite me to one of the, the Alpha events, and then I could tell that these small dinners reminded me of breaking bread at the foundation. It reminded me of the dinners I've attended at, YC. It reminded me of these places, base camp at Sequoia, all where these deep conversations are taking place, where people can actually feel like they can speak their mind. In a society that continues to kind of mute people's thinking, there's this there's this underground society that I call the quiet ones, who are all they want to do. You're not going to hear them loudly. You're not going to hear them out in front. They're the ones that are beneath the surface with both their life and work, and they want to have deep and meaningful conversations. And so that's why I'm such an advocate of Alpha. I feel like founders are craving places of authenticity where they can be more of themselves, get real-time feedback. And I don't really buy it when I hear folks saying, I don't have any mentors, or I don't have any counsel. I'm just kind of doing this thing on my own. It's not that I don't buy it. They just haven't thought of the people that have really impacted their lives as mentors or as thought partners in that way or in a traditional way. But man, we're all looking for that. We were all looking for those rooms.
Yeah, and you have to. I mean, it's just life's too hard. And that I think really speaks loudly to the concept of vicarious learning versus empiric learning. And if there just aren't enough hours in your life to be successful purely with empiric learning.
That's right.
You have to learn vicariously on some level in order to really get by in this world without, having horrible, terrible things happen to you.
That's right. Since you attended the launch of Schoolhouse, the first experience we launched at Schoolhouse was on 21st century leadership. For those folks that are listening, Schoolhouse think of it as kind of the YC for national security founders. It's a place where mission first founders can collide effectively with capital customers, communities, so the United States and our allies win. We haven't seen a platform like that in a while under that heading. And there's a whole fifth and a fire conversation that you and I can have at some point on the research that I did on why something like this hasn't existed for basically 30 years. There's some people to blame. There's other institutions to blame. But when you were there, the energy and the conversation, you could tell, especially among the break, when people broke out from the formal activities, it's always about the informal activity that you can really grasp whether or not you're catching the culture bug in the right direction that you hope to design an institution. I needed you there. I wanted you there. You attended it. You gave a great panel discussion with several folks up on stage, to include Admiral McRaven and Sham from Palantir and other folks. But the reason why I wanted to create that is now we'll kind of move into the national security discussion, but this community, meaning the venture community that we're a part of, I think deeply underestimates the importance of understanding the community writ large that is the Department of Defense, that is the Special Operations community, and the roles, the whole community, meaning the not-for-profits that participate, the roles that philanthropy and benevolence, and it's a whole network ecosystem that supports the tier one operator. It's not just the commands. It's not just the public side. It's the private side of both nonprofit and for-profit. There's a whole ecosystem of sophisticated capital and first customers and members of the community. And I think venture for a long time, and I really want to talk with you about this. I have a theory. I think they underestimate it because the majority of people in venture don't come from it. And so it's hard to translate that intangible quality of community in through the lens of something like Schoolhouse, in which it represents. So I'd love to kind of go back and forth with you on that.
Everything's really, really hard until you learn how to do it, and then it's just work. And one of the things I'm always amazed by, when I travel around the country, is there are so many ways to earn a living in this world and be a success. One of the more interesting people I've gotten to meet through my son's baseball journey, guy made tons of money manufacturing pallets.
Like wooden pallets, like just
wooden pallets.
Yeah.
Dude's crushed it. Yeah. Like unbelievable. crushed it. It never occurred to me that was like a job. But, you know, when you look at the national security community and the technology ecosystem that supports it, you know, prior to 9/11, roughly, you know, if you go back to the mid-90s, roughly 1/8 of global R&D was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense.
1/8.
All right. Yeah. So, you know, 9/11 occurs, everything gets focused on operational requirements. Now, not everything, but just a massive shift. And then you have a generation-long conflict, you know, full 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen is this radical decline in the spend on research and truly innovative early stage technology, a decline in the spending as a percentage of the overall budget, you know, from the DoD. And over that period, we've also seen a dramatic increase in private capital formation. You know, there's been a lot of legal changes that, you know, really, you know, took hold during, you know, Bush 43 and the Obama administrations that were just incredibly positive for early stage capital formation. And so we're starting to see that inflection come back up. But to your point, you know, when you look at where do partners at venture firms come from professionally, you know, they worked at Google, they worked at Microsoft, they worked at Apple, or, you know, some big successful enterprise tech company or consumer tech company. And so that's what they know, and they have great insights, and they meet people who come at them with that kind of a pitch, and it makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But I think we're starting to see the rise of a new generation of investors where a lot of them do come with a public service background, whether they're, you know, coming out of uniform or, you know, just coming out of the, you know, out of the Pentagon or something like that. And it's because a lot of the best and brightest of the last 20 years went overseas, you know.
That's right. Yep.
Stood on that wall to visit violence upon those who would mean to do us harm.
Yep.
They understand what goes into it. They understand where we have gaps. They understand that the threats in the world around us are very real. And they understand enough of the ecosystem that they can go figure out the business side of it. And that's, to me, portends a really interesting shift in the venture opportunity related to national security over, I think, the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see a dramatic increase. And that is super exciting to me, and I think you, and you know, I think we're off to a nice start, the two of us with our portfolios.
That's right.
But there's a long way to go. We need to, you know, we need to stop valuing SBIR revenue like it's ARR. You know, we need to, you know, start really understanding the path from, you know, a good idea at AFRL to a real program of record that, you know, flips into production use cases as opposed to research use cases. You know, there's always been a lot of cybersecurity software sold into the DoD and its related national security elements. So that I think is kind of the model. But to me, it's a really exciting area, and it tends to correlate with very high integrity, high quality people.
Perfect segue to precisely what I'm excited about. So now, mind you, for the folks listening, I'm a young investor in the sector. I'm 5 years into my journey, so I have a lot to learn from people like Matt and other folks in the sector, and I hope to always have a lot to learn from everyone inside of the sector. But here's what I saw. So think about it. I consider the new perspective to be the most valuable. So I'm losing the new perspective, and I can no longer claim ignorance to certain things, but early on I could claim ignorance to certain things, and I could ask, like, why is it this way? This doesn't make sense. Why don't more people talk about this? Like, you know, for instance, you know, a lot of folks say that they share diligence, and Like, I didn't have that experience. It's funds really protect their diligence. It's their IP. It's how they do deal memos. It's how the fund works. It's how the fund researches. But I certainly shared it with everybody I wanted to. I wanted people to pick it apart or tell me it was broke. And so I was learning, the moment I came in, I was learning that there's a left and right and a up and down and what is kind of considered the norm. But that new perspective, I knew I would lose it. But, after a certain amount of time, and I think I'm still there, and I haven't lost it entirely yet. But here's what you just mentioned is so important. What I care about is the fabric being impacted by the folks that are coming in. And I talk about it in the terms of a bottom line, where I think venture for too long has been inside of, and speaking from a very historical context and a learner context and a textbook context of learning about venture and the history of venture from 1999 to basically present day. But for a very long, capitalist is in the title. You're a venture capitalist. It's been about the bottom line, right? The bottom line, loss of dollars. What we're seeing happen now with what you just mentioned is there are people that have signed on the bottom line to give their life for something bigger than themselves. And when you have an influx of those personalities, like you said, the best and the brightest have been fighting overseas for 20 years. They've gone to some of them have gone to the best institutions the world has to offer. They're coming out with all types of life experience. They've traveled the world 6 times over again. They have a very centered perspective. And I'm not talking centrist in terms of politics. I could care less about that. I could care that they're centered. They're just centered people. And they have the best of both worlds where they've experienced things from both bottom line perspectives. That they've signed on the bottom line to give their life for something bigger than themselves. And now they're coming into an ecosystem where people just have been worried about the bottom line, which is loss of dollars, I think for too long. And we lost the way a bit in 21, and people were kind of losing their minds and thinking that everything was more valuable than it was. And then we saw a nice big bubble burst, and we saw some late stage players come on in and not really understand the culture of board dynamics and the experience that's needed in those board dynamics to make a company successful, which is why they haven't played in the early stages, because there's a culture that needs to be born on a board from start to finish. And so thinking of the influx of this type of personality, you have one bottom line personality coming to meet the other bottom line personality. How do you think and hope for maybe the culture to transform just a bit as a result of this?
To me, whether you're investing in national security or like social networking, like you're investing other people's money for most of what our industry does. And so to me, there's no way to rationalize or justify intrinsic reward as a replacement or substitute for generating great returns for your limited partners. If you're not putting up numbers, you're not going to be in this business for very long. But I do believe that over the 25 plus years that I've been wandering around this ecosystem, there's always been a search to work with the most high quality leaders, to build teams of super high quality humans. And when I say high quality, that comes with a level of character, a level of integrity, just people who match their words and their deeds. And they do so in a forthright manner. And it just so happens that it's really, really hard to be a leader in the military unless you're that type of person. So when you start seeing veterans, taking over Capitol Hill, you start seeing veterans increasingly flooding into the technology sector, the finance sector, other sectors. I think what they come with is a higher probability of being quality humans. Now, hey, statistically, there's going to be some people who don't live up to these ideals that we're talking about. But I think you have a higher correlation with this demographic than you do with most others. And that's why, a lot of the times when I'm looking at folks, it's, all right, were you a college athlete? Were you in the military? And were you in the military in a job that actually required to be, setting and achieving goals at an elite level in a team-based setting? That's the kind of stuff that correlates with success. And so, it gives me a lot of hope for the future that, our kids and grandkids will grow up in, that brighter days are ahead. And those days are going to be brought to us by the people who experience the darker days that are behind us. And understanding those darker days is what allows us to invest in and build the future. And we have a new associate, Caitlin, who during her interview, I asked her why she wanted to be a venture capitalist. And she said, well, I'm not sure I really would do forever, but my favorite thing about this industry is we get to invest in what we think the future should look like. And I think when people show up with that mentality and they happen to have a history of service, then all of a sudden we're starting to do well while doing good.
Yeah. Well done, Caitlin. That's a great response. There's a line in Bravo Victor's kind of onboarding job descriptions that it came to me when I was initially forming, in the formation stage of the idea and the fund several years ago. And I tried to look at, the exercise I did was let me look at the people that, inspire me, but also have this, what is it about the lens they have in the world that makes them so attractive to just, you get a sense that they're grounded in something much bigger than themselves. And I started to list out all of these attributes, and something that came out of that exercise was, I'm really looking, the people that I admire most are the folks that have seen the worst the world has to offer and seen the best the world has to offer and still think the world is extraordinary and bright. Those people, it's that classic quote, pessimists sound smart, but optimists are the one that make the money. There's a reason for that. And so I think you very eloquently described that. And when we have not just veterans, but people that have experienced public service, giving of themselves, that expectation of return to something bigger than themselves, it could be any form of public service. Coming into this sector, my advisor at the fund and a former partner of mine, he, on non-traditional route, he was a Teach for America for several years, but he was also, he happened to be a Yale mathematician, and to see the perspective that he had, growing this kind of experience set in kind of leading high school students for several years is a non-traditional route, but one of the many things that brought a very unique perspective of empathy paired with a bottom line perspective for LPs and returns. It was a very unusual kind of background and match that made him a great partner and a great friend. And so I appreciate you talking about it like that. One thing I definitely want to talk about is the balance between, because there is no balance. It's like you said, I forget exactly how you described work, but it's fairly constant. Our job is it's fun because it's so engaging and you're never without something to do and focus on and support. But, I know folks have pinged me about this and you've given me advice about this, but because it's not balance, it's harmony. It's trying to find what works with the people in your life to where you're allowing enough of yourself to those people and no one feels like they're getting leftovers the best you. So how have you learned, and what kind of opinions do you have on finding the harmony that works for a founder at different stages in their journey. And what have you seen work and not work?
I feel like I did a lot of empirical learning personally. The advice I typically give people when they're going to start a business is go to the people you love and care about that are not going to be part of this business and sit down with them and understand if those people are on board for the journey. Because people don't typically understand in advance just not just that it's long hours. I mean, everybody kind of expects that. It's the and it's all encompassing, and yeah, but it's the chaos. To me, the chaos is what creates the strain. It's not, hey, I'm putting in 12-hour days for the foreseeable future. That's fine. It's we have a dinner we're supposed to go to tomorrow night that's been on the calendar for a year, and I've carefully scheduled around it. And all of a sudden, my largest customer requires that I be in Dubai tomorrow. And that's where you're hurting feelings, and you start to feel like your life is not controllable. And when you look at people, when they, that's the kind of thing that creates stress. Hard work doesn't necessarily mean high stress. High stress to me comes from feeling out of control. And you can see how stress impacts different people, but most people never ever like feeling out of control. And that's when people start throwing Hail Marys. And once you start throwing Hail Marys, you've given up on the run game. And maybe I'm overplaying the football analogy right now, but it's that's a difficult thing in business. But sitting down and making sure people understand not only the effort level that's going to go into it, but the chaos, the degree of chaos that will invariably raise its head and create disappointments.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You outlined something well too, that when I'm meeting with someone, it's one thing we understand that we're looking for a sense of urgency to solve problems with founders. I get that. That's that's something that we obviously have to look for. But there is a difference between directed energy and frenetic energy. And it's palpable. You can feel it. One is chaotic and somewhat unorganized, and just I don't have things in control, as you put it, right? It's one thing to be out of control versus in control.
You want to be Roadrunner, not Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Tasmanian Devil.
Tasmanian Devil. Yeah, I knew what you meant. No, that's helpful, and I, there is no. I truly don't believe that there's balance, because even I get this question all the time from folks, and I don't know whether people think I have balance, or at least maybe I'm giving off directed energy, hopefully. But I'll tell you this: the amount of times I get this question from certain people about balance and all these things, there is no balance. Let's just say we work a 9 to 5. This is a 5 to 9 job, not a 9 to 5. And even if I did work a 9 to 5 job, I'm still spending 8 hours at work and not 8 hours with my family. So there is no balance. It's harmony, and I think marrying something closer to a warfighter than I always think of Hannah as a warfighter, not a wife. Like, she has had to balance a lot of things, that she didn't know that she was going to have to do with kind of working within the profession that I've chosen, that our family works with. So I really agree with, go to the people that you say I love you to, and they say I love you back, and you figure out if they're on board with this launch pad of an adventure. And you should really take them seriously if they say that they are not on board with it. Because I understand you're bullheaded and you want to go achieve this thing, but man, you will lose that person over time. I will almost guarantee you will lose that person that says I love you to you over time if they're not on board with it. 100%. So just as we kind of wrap up, I certainly want to talk to you about teams. And we talked a little bit about it on Crosslink, obviously. But when you look at founding teams, it's never just a founder. It's a founder that's a part of this early, kind of starting team. And how do you dig in with the founder to figure out how they think about the formation of that founding team around themselves? This is always a fascinating question for me.
I mean, at this point, I've been doing it long enough that I'm starting to work with people on their second, third, in one case, fourth time.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I hope I have that problem.
So that's a really neat one, because there is just less team risk. It's about, all right, what's the idea this time? And,
Sure.
How expensive are you going to make this for me?
Right.
Because you're not a rookie and you could probably do it with your own money.
Right.
But no, I think a lot of it is sitting down, understanding strengths and weaknesses, and how good is this founder at, filling their gaps. We have one that we were inception level investors in, about a year ago, year and a half. And it's been really interesting because it was it is somebody that I've invested in the past. And we had a very direct conversation around, okay, this is what you're good at. This is where, you're probably not tier one. So go get some tier ones for those particular, functions. And it took him about 6 months to find the right co-founders. And it was a really fun journey. We actually identified them all within 2 days. However, there was a process of making sure we were doing this the right way. And when I say we, I mean the CEO, not me. It's like, yeah, that's a good idea. But he was just very deliberate about the process, and he wanted to make sure he wasn't just knee-jerking into people he's just known forever. And it turned out it was pretty much what we thought it was going to be on day one. But he still went through the process of figuring out, all right, who are the best people on earth that I can find to fill in my skill gaps or to enhance my skill gaps in a comparative advantage sort of a way.
So that is a privilege to work with, obviously repeat founders that have had successful events. And for folks listening, obviously that's a huge testament to want to come back consistently to the same VC to work with, because you have to work with these people for a very, very long time, which is why I don't want to wish away time, but I certainly wish I could, be on Fund 4, Fund 5, and have those examples to work with, but we're on our way. I guess the last thing that I would love to know from you is what will have made all of this worth it? The time, the effort, the energy. What will have made it all worth it for you?
I mean, it's already worth it. I love what I do. When your vocation is kind of your avocation, like, you're winning in life. Yeah. Every day I'm in this business is a good day. I mean, some are better than others, but it's just a very high karma business if you're doing it the right way, because your job is to go out and meet with incredibly talented, success-oriented people who are telling you how they're going to change the world for the better. And then you give them capital so that they can do it faster and bigger, which that's just a really high karma thing. Now, there are other elements of the job that are less pleasant. For instance, when the idea doesn't work and you have to shut a company down, which, statistically that happens more than most of us admit. So when I think about what makes it worth it, it's just the journey. It's the friendships. It's the relationships. It's, when you see good things happen to good people, I mean, that's just great. But, I don't feel like I'm chasing anything in this business. I'm just getting to be in this business and getting to be around people and hopefully offer them a couple words of advice that, might influence an outcome, to be a little bit better. I'm just thankful that, entrepreneurs want me on the journey with them.
I love that. The high karma business, that is so true. And if you surround yourself with those high karma people, like attracts like. It won't be very long until you are around those people and they start introducing you to the people around them. Once the trust currency is built, and now you are surrounded by these high karma people. This is why, back to the gold standard examples that I had coming into venture, coming to my first profession with Hal, coming into venture with Kevin, high caliber, high karma people introduce you to the most extraordinary people because they've lived their entire life that way. So they're all guilty by association. And I really appreciate you saying that. And I don't think I've ever asked you this before, but something we didn't get a chance to talk about. Folks like to kind of delineate and talk about national security as it's this different thing. And it has its nuances, but so does fintech, so does, biotech, so do all these different sectors of technology. They all have their own nuances and their idiosyncrasies and the unique players that play within them. But when I really think about the universality of the attributes that belong to the successful founders, let's take John Goodson for a second. John Goodson is just a different person. He is so unique. What I do mean about using John Goodson as an example, there's a history and a track record of accomplishing successful things at the highest level possible and being a part of a very 0.01% community. Best predict your future success, past success, and look for these behaviors. And then I compare him to some folks inside of my portfolio and how they think about things. And there's this pattern recognition that goes across industry, across sector, whether you're defense, national security, aerospace. The universality of the traits of those that are exceptional within those sectors are universal. They all kind of talk the same way, they act the same way, they speak the same way, they organize their time the same way, they're driven in a similar way. It's very directed energy, not kinetic. And when you look for people inside of venture, how do you spot someone that you say to yourself, that's someone in venture that kind of understands it. There's someone I'd like to work with. What's that attraction and lure for you on the VC side?
Well, so finding co-investors is critically important. I have seen billions of dollars of value destroyed by investors that don't go about doing things the right way. And unfortunately, that was an empiric learning, not just vicarious. And so it really does boil down to, is this person honest? When they look me in the eye, or do I know they're going to tell me the truth? And that just takes time to develop trust with people. The other is, are they really going to do work, or are they going to mail it in? It's one thing to show up to a board meeting and, pontificate about burn rate. It's a very different thing to say, all right, well, let's really sit down and hone your customer pitch. Let's understand your value proposition and think through, how we can make our offering, applicable to a larger market opportunity and that sort of thing. It's why a lot of times passive investing frustrates me. I have a couple of portfolio companies where I'm not on the board of directors, and it's just odd for me because if I'm going to bet my own money and that of our LPs, then I feel like I want to be there, putting my hand on the wheel a little here and there, or not micromanaging, but at least sit in the back seat and point out that there's a roadblock coming up ahead. because I'm old and I've been doing it a little bit. So it's, finding people that are willing to roll up their sleeves, that, show up with, hey, this is how I approach the business. And if that's compatible with this company, then I can help you and you can make me a lot of money. And that's where it works best, because if you're just along for the ride and don't do anything, well, that's just not helpful. And, we're in a world where even though interest rates are, much higher than they were a few years ago, they're still really, really low. Money's still there's still a lot of it out there. And I think as an investor, you have to be able to, entrepreneurs want you to bring more than just your checkbook. And I think there's value to that. And hopefully we can continue being a small measure of the value equation in terms of helping companies grow and flourish.
That's right. I mean, look, the folks that are listening, on paper, it would look like Matt and I would be competitors. There couldn't be, that couldn't be further from the truth. There's people that you want to work with, and there's people that you want to lead alongside. I would let Matt see everything that I see, so that I could gain his additional lens into opportunities that, and remember, if it's about the founder winning and truly founder friendly, I would prefer to have, in some cases, Matt alongside me on the journey than others. And I think that's what makes founders win, is this balanced skill set, despite giving up a little economics here and there, because if the founder wins big, none of that is going to matter anyways. So
yeah, and I would say it's not about being founder friendly. It's about being transparent and candid and honest and forthright. Because it's really about the business.
That's right.
And the one thing that's really cool about founders is that's a title that can never be taken away.
That's right.
You're not going to be the CEO forever. Even if you stay and take it public, eventually you'll retire and somebody else will be a CEO. But the title founder, that is durable. And there are very, very few things in this world that are durable. Being a founder is one of them.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. All right, last question, then we're done. There must be something you have that you want to leave and have it be known to be yours. An idea, a thought, a philosophy, something you've always felt that is correct, that other people may have argued against. What is that one thing that you'd want people to know?
Have a great family. I mean, honestly, to me, if you'd asked me this question 30 years ago, I'd have given a very different answer. And the older I get, the more I see, my son, grow and flourish, the more I realize that's my legacy is my family, and I'm not big on needing my name on a building or anything like that. I just, hopefully if I'm gone and people talk about me, they say he left it better than he found it. And there's a great example with his son and maybe grandchildren at some point. Who knows?
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, I love it. I don't hear that enough, I don't think, because if I were to ever see, you met Brett, actually. Brett gave me an opinion one time that when I was expecting my third, he goes, you will only ever be as happy as your most unhappy child. And I had to let that settle in. And I was like, okay, now I understand, because I mean, hell, my 2.5-year-old has some pretty rough days. She's a bruiser. And when that day goes wrong, mom's not happy. I walk upstairs, it's absolutely chaos, and nobody's happy, let alone the more serious issues that some people face. So I think you're right, the nurture of your family, so that you can be successful over here, is just as important as you being successful over here so that you can nurture your family.
Well, none of the other stuff matters. I mean, at the end of the day, like if you don't have that, then the rest isn't as meaningful.
That's right. That's right. Well, very meaningful conversation as always. I want to thank you for taking time to have a long form conversation. Normally it's over like a 6-hour dinner with about 7 to 10 glasses of water in between other things. But I want to let you know I'm very grateful for you. I'm grateful for your mentorship. Thank you for bringing me into your kind of family and network inside of the venture community. I truly mean it when I say I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. And a shout out to Eric Chin and a shout out to David. They've been wonderful. If I ever shoot Eric Chin a question, I get a response in 30 seconds. So he is so full of energy all the time to support people that I think give a shit about giving a shit, that he is just so on it. And so I'm grateful to him and your teammates and the entire Crosslink team, and as well as the Alpha community that I've come to know and love. So thank you, Matt, for taking time and sharing some ideas with us today.
Well, hey, Joe, it's always great hanging out, and thank you for including me on this. And honestly, you're the one who brought me into your world first, with the Honor Foundation. So thank you very much, because, when I think about people who leave the world better than they found it, you've had an outsized, irrationally large impact on the lives of tens of thousands of men and women and their families who have served this country. And, that the return on that's a hell of a lot higher than, anything else we're doing as venture capitalists. So
I completely agree.
Well done.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us on TLC Equation. We have tremendous gratitude for each of our guests who share their unique stories and journey with our audience. Remember, TLC Equation is your quiet guide and blueprint for building, forging, and attracting extraordinary teams, leaders, and culture into your work and life. Please continue exploring these ideas along your own journey, and subscribe on YouTube and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Joe Musselman. Until next time, practice artistry and seek excellence everywhere.